Welcome, fellow Lions fans, and welcome all fans who love the sweet, sweet taste of revenge. That's right, this is a Lions revenge game. Not for the players, not the coaches, but the longtime fans of the Lions who remember the year 1992 when we lost 41-10 in the conference championship game to the Washington Redskins. No offense to any Native American people or Native American potatoes. The Redskins were dominant that year and went on to beat the Bills 37-24 in the Super Bowl. The Lions really didn't have much of a chance in that game, even after destroying the Cowboys 38-6 the week before. But this year is different. We are the dominant team. We are 9.5-point favorites. So this year, let's take vengeance upon the Washington football team, no matter what nickname they currently have. Maybe they aren't one of our fiercest rivals like the Packers or the Vikings. Oh, and I almost forgot, the Bucks. But still, we should summon the fury, summon the hate. To quote from the best movie I saw in 2024, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, where the evil villain Dementus says to Furiosa,
"You crawled out of a pitiless grave deeper than hell. Only one thing's going to do that for you. Not hope. Hate. No shame in hate. It's one of the great forces of nature."
I'm Jimmy Liao, University of Michigan Medical School grad, board certified in family medicine, lifelong Lions fan. Today is January the 15th, Wednesday. What an epic long weekend of football we just had. Basically a 5-day weekend with the college football playoffs on Thursday and Friday, leading into 3 days of NFL playoffs. In the first ever 12-team college playoff, it was truly fascinating to see how little they care about concussions. In the first semifinal game, Tyler Warren, tight end, who's number 5 on Jeff Risdon's big board, had obvious concussion signs after he landed hard on the back of his head. His eyes rolled up in the back of his head and he was down for a while. Then, like 3 plays later, he's back in there throwing blocks, taking more big hits, and I'm like, what the fuck? They just don't give a shit about concussions, do they? Then the next game on Friday, Arch Manning of Texas got hit so hard in the head that he dropped the ball and then was stumbling trying to get up off the ground, looking like his 75-year-old granddad, Archie Manning, if he had fallen and fractured his hip. Maybe it was Archie Manning in the game, who knows? But whoever it was, nobody even makes a mention of it on the broadcast. No trainers came out to help him. Nobody really cared. That's the college football playoffs, baby. It just means more concussions. Moving on to the NFL playoffs, it just means less, much, much less for the Steelers and the Broncos, who got trampled by the Ravens and the Bills, respectively. Setting up a huge game of the Ravens and Bills, neither of who I want to see in the Super Bowl. I'd much rather play the Chiefs or the Texans, which raises an interesting rooting conundrum for me. The Chiefs and Texans play before our game on Saturday. The team that would be the easiest to face in the Super Bowl by far is the Texans. But if they pull off an upset of the Chiefs, it's very unlikely they beat the Bills or the Ravens the next game. Whereas the Chiefs are much more likely to knock off the Bills or the Ravens. So I'm not quite sure who I want to win that Chiefs-Texans game. Over in the NFC, the Packers and Vikings both fizzled out at the end of the season. It's amazing how important that Lions-Vikings regular season finale turned out to be for the Vikings. Sam Darnold, who was an MVP-level player for the first 16 games of the season, was finally turned into a pumpkin by us. You're welcome, J.J. McCarthy. Now you get to throw to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. As long as Addison doesn't kill himself or anybody else driving 140 miles an hour like he did in 2023, or in 2024 when he was found asleep blocking a lane of traffic, who knows what the new year is going to bring for Addison. Some guys just need their license and car keys revoked. The Packers had a pretty good year in a very tough division, but looked real bad losing to the Eagles. Jordan Love, who's getting to be concerningly good for a few games last year in 2023 with his fadeaway jumper passes, was not able to replicate that success this year. They have some health concerns at wide receiver going forward also. Christian Watson tore his ACL, likely misses at least the first half of next season. Romeo Doubs, who was already wearing a guarding cap due to concussions earlier this season, got another concussion during the playoff game. It happened when his head whiplashed onto the turf. Beware of unintended consequences. Guardian caps potentially could make whiplash injuries worse due to the increased mass. The Eagles are a very good team, especially since they always have 1st and 9s instead of 1st and 10s because of their unstoppable tush push. I have no idea how they're so good at that play, but it's a massive advantage for their offense. But other than that, they don't really scare me. Saquon Barkley is excellent, but we're pretty stout against the run. If we can stop the run, I don't think Jalen Hurts can beat us. He has trouble throwing anticipation passes, which has caused discontent in their locker room this year. He could be a very good runner, but the past couple years he's been running very timid. He goes out of bounds or slides at the very first opportunity, probably because of all the injuries he's had. A couple years ago, he had a leg or knee issue. This past year, he had a concussion just a couple weeks ago. He really has no heart for running these days. And that brings us to those rascally commies who got a lucky bounce off the field goal post for the win. That does bring back some memories, as it was only a few short years ago, in 2019, that the goalpost was the best player on our team. Our game against the Commanders features a fascinating quarterback dichotomy. You got Jaden Daniels, who's an incredible runner, rushing for 891 yards in the regular season, moves like a slithery cheetah. And then you have Jared Goff, who had 56 rushing yards all season and runs like a giraffe, newborn baby. No offense to newborn giraffes. The Lions are favored by 9.5, which is an enormous line for the playoffs. Biggest line of the weekend. Chiefs are at -8 over Houston. Eagles are -6 over the Rams. Ravens are -1 over the Bills. Exciting times for us Lions fans. Now let's get to the injury health news for the week. We, of course, had a healthy last weekend because we had a bye, but the Commanders had to play a game. They had a pretty healthy game, though. The most significant injury I saw during the game was Darron Payne, their big defensive tackle who dislocated his thumb. After the game, he posted an x-ray of his thumb, which showed a dorsal dislocation of the thumb MCP joint. That's the metacarpophalangeal joint. A dorsal dislocation has a better prognosis than a volar dislocation. Dorsal is when the joint dislocates towards the back of the hand. Volar is when the dislocation is towards the palmar side of the hand. There is a chance of collateral ligament damage to the thumb, which includes the UCL. That's the ulnar collateral ligament. That can be torn, causing what's called the skier's thumb or gamekeeper's thumb, which typically requires surgery to fix. If he didn't tear any significant ligaments, he could heal up with splinting for 3 weeks or so. On the injury reports this week, he has LPs, limited practices, which means he is on track to play, likely with a splint, though, that's going to affect his ability to grab. For the defensive tackle position, that will impact his effectiveness. Now, let's go over the injury report for the week. I'm recording this on Wednesday, January the 15th, which means we've already had 2 reports already since the game is on Saturday. The big return for the week is David Montgomery, who's had 2 FPs this week, full practices. Great news after missing 4 weeks with at least an MCL injury. The 4 weeks is consistent with a moderate MCL sprain, a partial tear of the MCL, not a full tear, but at least one doctor suggested he needed surgery, and he had to go to multiple doctors before deciding he was going to try rehab. So likely there's something going on a little bit more than just a straightforward partial MCL. The FPs means he's on track to play Saturday, no problems. So what can we see as far as snap count? I don't expect any limitations to his snap count based on how the Lions have handled players in the past. Jahmyr Gibbs with his hamstring last year, 87% of snaps in his first game back. David Montgomery, who missed a couple games with his ribs last year, rib cartilage, 38% snap count in his first game back. Last week we saw Alex Anzalone, 98% of snaps after breaking his forearm. Now speaking of Alex Anzalone, Not great that he broke his forearm, but there are multiple silver linings that came out of it. Number one, we still secure the number one seed, so his loss didn't hurt us. Number two, during those 6 games off, he did not suffer a more serious injury. In the NFL multiverse, you never know when someone's going to have a tib-fib like Aiden Hutchinson or an ACL like Ali McNeil, so Anzalone avoided any fluky serious injury during his time off. Third reason, because it was an arm injury, not a leg, his legs are fresher, healthier than they were before the injury. So he's probably a better player now than before he got hurt. That helped us during the regular season finale. That's going to help us throughout the playoffs. So back to David Montgomery. Prior to his injury, he was logging around 30 to 50% of snaps. I'd anticipate him in the range of 30 to 40% of snaps in this game, given Jahmyr Gibbs' high production lately. Next on the report is great news with Terrion Arnold. FPs the first 2 days of this week with his foot on the right side. The FP confirmed the positive early signs last week, which were a negative x-ray, as well as him being high spirits and the report of a foot contusion. He's going to be available for Saturday with no issues. That's very important with us already missing Carlton Davis, the other starter. Now let's move on to the bad news of the reports. Kevin Zeitler, who had a right hamstring strain on video, 2 NPs, which is concerning. The video did suggest a concerning right hamstring strain, and these NPs validates that concern. Hamstrings benefit from a gradual ramp up to avoid aggravation. With 2 NPs, not sure he's going to be able to ramp up in time for Saturday's game. At this point, I think he is leaning out. However, this being the playoffs, it's slightly different than a regular season game. So there is still a chance he could play even without too much of a ramp up. He'd have to get up to at least an LP on the last report on Thursday, ideally an FP. Otherwise, he's most likely going to miss the game. Christian Mahogany, who's played well this year, should take his place. Pat O'Connor, defensive tackle with a calf strain likely, 2 NPs. Dan Campbell last week had already expressed pessimism regarding this injury. The NPs confirms this. I would not expect him to play this weekend against Commanders. That's going to be a big loss as he's been playing around 50% of defensive snaps in the latter part of the season. Hopefully, if we win the game, he can get up to LPs the week after this. Next is Ennis Rakestraw, who last week opened his practice window on January the 9th, which was 7 weeks after him being placed on IR for his hamstring strain. That's a long time for a hamstring, but great news that he finally opened his practice window last week. However, 2 NPs this week listed with a hamstring illness. I'm suspecting the NPs are related to his illness and not the hamstring, but we don't really know anything for sure. If the illness resolves quickly and he can get up to an FP on the final practice day, he might be available for the game. But regardless, he's really just a special teams player at this point, with Arnold healthy, Amik Robinson starting on the other side, Kindle Vildor still likely going to be the primary backup. So Ennis Rakestraw probably wouldn't see any defensive snaps anyway. Finally on the list is Taylor Decker, who was unlisted on the first report, but had a personal day NP on the second report. Now, the rumors online is that the personal day is due to a happy situation, which is an upcoming newborn baby. Hopefully, we get confirmation of this from Taylor Decker in the next day or two. His wife may be having an induction, which is a common thing for players to have during the season so that the birth does not coincide with a game. I've induced dozens of babies in my training. It's a pretty straightforward, reliable procedure. Usually, you can have that baby out within a day or two. What helps makes the process smoother for them is that this is their second child. Labor induction is more difficult and takes longer for a woman's first vaginal delivery. Second, third, and beyond go fast and furious. It's like the Fast and Furious movies, actually. By the 9th one, that baby's coming out so fast, it could shoot into space. It's also possible the mom's having a planned C-section, which would be a guaranteed delivery time. Either way, Decker should be available on Saturday. Now let's go over the Lions' IR list status update. We've used 8 out of 10 IR returns with Rakestraw, Anzalone, Raymond, Broderick Martin, Mosley, Reeves-Maybin, and Melifonwu twice. 2 returns left. Really the only 2 possibilities that I see are Aiden Hutchinson and Carlton Davis. Hutchinson, left tib-fib fracture, October the 13th. I'm still expecting limited action in the Super Bowl, which is 4 weeks away. Dan Campbell last week was not optimistic about a return, but he didn't rule it out. The bone's likely been healed for multiple weeks now, so right now he's just rehabbing things. We saw him on the sideline last game in the regular season finale, on the sideline, moving around well, helping out the guys on the sideline, so he's really getting back involved with the team. Here's something to look for next week. Look for his practice window to open next week, as there's only 3 weeks left till the Super Bowl, and there's no practice after the Super Bowl. So why not open up the window? No reason to keep it closed. At the minimum, he can be on the practice field to give out high fives, practice touchdown celebrations. I don't see any downside to opening up his window next week, so hopefully that happens. The other guy on IR who might return, Carlton Davis, jaw fracture on December the 15th. The initial estimated recovery was around 6 weeks, which would put him back for the NFC Championship game. But Dan Campbell, a couple weeks ago, said not to expect him back. So things aren't looking good at this point. But I'm still holding out a glimmer of hope here that maybe he could return for the Super Bowl, which would be at the 8-week mark. After this week, there's only 3 weeks left till the Super Bowl. But with him, a jaw fracture, his practice window might not open until right before he is ready. Because as soon as that jaw is ready, not only can he practice, he can play right away. It's not a leg issue like Aiden Hutchinson that needs more of a gradual ramp up. The other guys on IR who are not expected to return, Derek Barnes, John Kominski, Aleem McNeil, Khalil Dorsey, Malcolm Rodriguez, Marcus Davenport, Kyle Pecco, Makai Wingo, and also Emmanuel Mosley, who was placed on NFI a couple weeks ago for an illness. Now let's move on to the Washington Commanders injury report. As mentioned earlier, Darang Payne, he's had 2 LPs this week after his thumb dislocation. That strongly suggests he's going to play, but likely wearing a splint, which is going to affect his ability to grab. He plays around 70 to 80% of snaps regularly. He's had 4 sacks and 42 total tackles on the year, so he's a fairly impactful player for them. The other guy to watch on the report is Bobby Wagner, their linebacker who has an ankle with 2 NPs this week. He played 100% of snaps last game. I did not see any injury. And he also played 100% of snaps the 10 games prior. So this guy's an Iron Man. I'm suspecting that that's going to continue on Saturday, that he's going to play, especially since I didn't see any injury during the game last weekend. I would expect him to get up to an LP, maybe an FP on the final practice report, and him to play on Saturday. Those are the 2 main guys to watch on the Commanders report. I'll run through the rest though. Jordan McGee, linebacker, hamstring, 2 NPs, mainly a special teams contributor, plays minimal snaps on defense, so minimal impact there. Zane Gonzalez, their kicker, who successfully banked in the game-winning field goal last game, LP, then FP, so he's going to play. Ben Sanat, tight end, 2 LPs with a shoulder. He's only a part-time player on offense. He's only had 5 receptions on the entire year. He's been under 10 offensive snaps in the past 4 games, so minimal impact on offense there. The rest of the report is guys with FPs or NPs due to rest. Jamison Crowder, wide receiver, rest, NP, then LP. Zach Ertz, tight end, rest, NP, then LP. Cleveland Farrell, defensive end, knee and rest, NP, LP. John Bates, tight end, shoulder, 2 FPs. Dominique Hampton, linebacker with a back, 2 FPs. Marshawn Lattimore, cornerback, hamstring, 2 FPs. Frankie Luvu, linebacker, shoulder, 2 FPs. Colson Yankoff, tight end, hamstring, 2 FPs. Brandon Coleman, offensive tackle, shoulder, unlisted, then FP. All right, so that's the report for today. Overall, good news, bad news on the report for the Lions. We got Debo back. Terrion Arnold is fine after a foot scare last game, but there are concerns with Kevin Zeitler, Pat O'Connor, who might be losses from the last game. Enjoy the game Saturday night. Let's get our revenge and move on to the conference championship game. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.